New York Giants training camp is right around the corner, just a couple days away, and we're here today. The Big Blue View staff en masse, basically, some of us anyway. Not maybe not all of us who were supposed to be here. Our good friend Chris Pflum's a little bit late. Chris will join us in a little bit, but we're here to discuss Giants training camp, the upcoming Giants season, and answer your questions if you have any. So please drop them in the chat if you have any questions, and we'll try to get to them. This is Ed Valentine with Nick Falato and with Tony DelGenio. Chris will be joining us in a few minutes as we talk Giants. So guys, thanks for hopping on. It's we've done this a couple times now, and it's always seems to be fun, always seems to go over pretty well.
It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to jump on here with Ed Valentine and Tony DelGenio, and whenever Chris Pflum decides to show up.
Well, we're not waiting for Chris. Chris can get here when he gets here. Chris says he's stuck in traffic somewhere, and all I can say is, that's bad planning on his part. I'm sorry. That's just bad planning to be going out for dinner, right before showtime. That's just bad planning.
How dare he eat?
Anyway, guys, I'm gonna start with this. It's been an interesting offseason for the Giants. And, I've even said, look, you can go through the roster and you look at it position by position, and you can say that the roster is either better at every position or potentially better at every position. And it feels like, there's kind of a sense of optimism about the Giants heading into camp. Do you guys feel like that's justified, or do you feel like it's just it's just because we haven't seen any bad football yet?
I would say it's a little column A and a little column B. I mean, there's always an air of gratitude that football's coming back, for one, and secondly, it's always everyone's positive in training camp. Everyone's a champion in training camp, right? But look, this is the first time in a long time that the New York Giants have a different starting quarterback than Daniel Jones. That's one thing. And Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, they were entrusted with another season, and they poured assets into this team. And they did, I would say, revamp this roster. There's a lot of excitement surrounding the team. I would say the excitement is warranted, and I'm not going to sit here and suggest that the New York Giants are going to win the Super Bowl. I don't have delusions of grandeur, but it's nice that football is coming back and the team has seemingly been upgraded at least a little bit this offseason.
All right, we're gonna let Chris into the room, since he seems to have popped into the waiting room. So, Chris, nice of you to join us. Plan dinner better next time. Come on.
I planned dinner fine. I didn't plan traffic. But thank you for letting me catch my breath. I only broke 7 laws on my way here.
Only 7 for us. Only 7.
It was a Jeep, not my dad's Mustang. I'll do better next time, I promise.
All right. So Tony, did you let's get, Tony, did you have thoughts on optimism, entering the season?
Yeah, well, I'm always optimistic going into the season, and I think, as Nick indicated, I think the Giants have seemingly made themselves better at just about every position that we may have considered them to be weak last year. But I think back to 2022 going into 2023, and I thought the Giants made themselves better in 2023 also, and that didn't quite work out. So
don't remind us.
Yeah, and we learned very quickly that it didn't work out, and so I think there are still some things to be concerned about with this team, which I'm sure we'll go into. But I feel like they have a pretty representative team at most positions, and there are places where I'm anxious in a positive sense, to see what they do and how that works out. But there's still a couple of places where I'm still holding my breath, wondering whether it's going to be the bane of the team again.
Chris,
is it offensive line?
Offensive line is one of them. And and when Andrew Thomas gets back into the lineup, and so on, that's one of them. And cornerback is my other one.
Yeah. I'll say, as far as optimism goes, I am more optimistic than I have been in years past.
Not saying much, but yeah.
Well, yeah, that's true.
It's all relative, guys.
Yes. Everything's relative, just ask Einstein. But yeah, I'll say I do believe they are better at most positions, most units. The big question is quarterback. Can Russell Wilson can he be Russ? I'm sure Daboll will do his best to let Russ cook, but at his age, with the number of years he has in the league, with his decline over the last couple of years, because he's not the quarterback I studied when I attended the Scouting Academy in 2020, which, man, that tape was beautiful. But he is, I would say, still a better passer and a more ambitious passer than Daniel Jones was. And I do believe that should pay dividends for the team as a whole. And I think everything is kind of downstream from that. I said recently, I do believe that quarterback is the foundation for the team. Like, if your foundation is square, or if your foundation isn't square, it doesn't matter really if your drywall is cracking, you've got drafty windows, and your roof leaks, because you can fix all that. It's still going to happen. I really do believe that if the quarterback can be a solid foundation, you can have a solid team. I mean, the Chiefs made the Super Bowl last year, and look how freaking flawed they were. Their entire receiving core got wiped out. By the end of the year, their offensive line was as big a mess as the Giants was. But they had Mahomes. They had one of the best quarterbacks to ever do it. If the Giants can just get consistently competent play, who can execute Brian Daboll's vision out of Russell Wilson, I think they can be better. That's enough reason for me to be optimistic. I don't know if I'll say they'll have a winning record, but I think they can be better, and I think they can be good enough that the young guys can take steps forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think Brian Daboll, even last year when Drew Lock had the big game against Indianapolis at the end of the year, Brian Daboll was sort of pounding the table and saying, this is what it would look like if we had good quarterback play, or this is what it should look like. And so there is that. But the reality of it is that any sense of optimism really, in the Giants fan base, it's not about Russell Wilson. It's about the fact that Daniel Jones is gone and that there's a new first-round pick, young quarterback who gives you the potential of having that long-term answer in Jackson Dart. It's fresh air, because we're not talking about that same thing, that we've talked about for the last 6 years, which is Daniel Jones ever going to be good enough? So I see Nick shaking his head and grabbing his microphone there. He wants to say something. So go ahead there, Mr. Falato.
No, I think you're spot on with your analysis and your assessment there. It really is. Even like Russell Wilson, this is the intermediary between the future, which is Jackson Dart. And we're trying to see if Russell Wilson can look. Chris said, let Russ cook. Is that going to be a Michelin-styled chef? Probably not. No.
I don't know if Russ can cook anymore. We don't know yet. I
think he can cook, but I think he cooks at a restaurant that's 3.5 stars or something like that. You go there, you might have one dish that you really like. They have some good appetizers that are cheap to cook. But in all seriousness, it's an upgrade over, in my opinion, what the Giants had. And it's also going to allow the Giants to be more explosive, which should open up some alleys for the rushing attack, and also hopefully put some points on the board, which will allow the defense to do what they do best, which is rush the damn passer. So all of that together, that does get me excited for the season. And it's just, as you said, Ed, you have Jackson Dart waiting in the wings. So when this Russell Wilson thing does not work out, if it does not work out in this 1 year that he has here in New York, then you have Jackson, and that's the future. And then we can evaluate to see if he can be more than what we've received over the last 6 years.
Tony, anything?
Yeah, I agree with both of those things. I mean, I think the Giants are going to have a better defense this year than they had last year, and some of the games they lost last year were because of the defense. In particular, the soft run defense, I think, was a big issue for them. Whether it's going to be better this year, I don't know. They've got a couple of cracks at improving what's going on in the interior. I don't see the replacement for Leonard Williams necessarily being there. Maybe Darius Alexander can become the replacement for Leonard Williams. In the meanwhile, they've got Roy Robertson, Harris. Anyway, they have ways to I think make the run defense more stout. The pass rush, you have to be, if there's one thing that I think you have to be excited about for the Giants, it's the pass rush, because with the addition of Abdul Carter, you have a team that had a good pass rush already last year, and now you're adding another piece to it, and a piece that's versatile as well, since he can play off-ball linebacker as well. And so I'm pretty high on the Giants defense, even though I'm still holding my breath a little bit about the secondary. The offense is going to determine, I think, ultimately how many games they win, and I think it almost has to be better, because I think that Russell Wilson will take better advantage of the Giants' receiving talent than Daniel Jones was able to do. And he's not the Russell Wilson of the Super Bowl years, 2013 or whatever that year was, but he's still a competent quarterback, and he's a quarterback who likes to push the ball downfield. It should at least be more fun to watch. Whether it will result in more wins or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that really is the operative question. That, and just the overall play of the offensive line. Like, if they can at least play to the level they did before Andrew Thomas got hurt, I think this team has the talent to surprise some people. Like, all of the tape studies and deep dives I did this year, one of the things that stood out to me is just the Giants have young guys with potential. They have players who can play. It's just getting them all up to that next step. And I'm not going to lie to myself and say they will all do it. Daniel Bellinger, he might not make it back to the form he showed as a rookie. Jalen Hyatt might not be, Deshaun Jackson 2.0. Cordell Flott might not take that next step and really push for a starting job, but at least some of them probably will. And I think as long as, again, you get that competent play, that push the ball downfield, maybe give some room to Wan'Dale Robinson to do some things, they can make noise. I think they can, at the very least, push some of these playoff caliber teams a lot harder than I think they are expecting to be pushed.
It's interesting because you wonder if the Giants could become a team that other teams really don't want to play. I think that's what you're getting at, Chris. Yes. I don't know how many games they'll win that schedule. And I hate, as soon as the schedule comes out, one of us does the game by game predictions. And this was my year, and I came up with 7-10. And I hate doing it. I hate doing it because you don't know what teams are going to look like. No. Like you can pretty much guarantee that the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be good. All right. That the Commanders are going to be good, but you still don't know, is Jaden Daniels going to play the weeks that the Giants play the Commanders? Who's going to be in the lineup? Who's not going to be in the lineup? banged up our teams, what's been their travel schedule, how rested are they, those kinds of things. You don't know right now. So I like to wait until the week that you play a team to really think about that team. But yeah, it would be nice if the Giants became a team that teams really didn't look forward to playing and didn't just look at that, and say, oh, that's a W, that's a team. And instead it was, we're going to have to work to win that game.
Yeah. I said to you about the time you put out your prediction, I think by the end of the year, the Giants are that team, that playoff teams, like teams that are looking at their scheduling and say, okay, if we win X games, we're going to the playoffs. And fans are, looking at teams like, okay, where are our wins? Yet the Giants are going to be that team that nobody wants to see come to town, or they do not want to go to travel to see that team. What I'm picturing is something like end of the season 2022 Lions. Like, yes, the Giants made the playoffs that year, but the Lions were the team, like, from the very first game they played, you could watch them that year and go, okay,
you could see that something. Right. You could see that train coming.
Yeah, they might not be there yet, but this team is, like, they're going to push teams. Like, this is not an easy W. And one of the things I'm looking forward to is, like, I don't want to be laughing in the first quarter of a Giants game. Like, there were so many games last year. Like, now granted, with the comedy of errors they had at quarterback and all the injuries they had, like, there were first quarters was like, the only response was to laugh. And I don't think that will happen this year. Like, obviously anything can happen. We have been wrong before. The Giants have a great track record of making us look like fools, but barring unforeseen circumstances, I really do think they have the ability, between the defense and the explosiveness they have on tap at offense, between Russell's moonballs and Darius Slayton and Jalen Hyatt's speed and Malik Neighbors being Malik Neighbors and then Tyrone Tracy. Yeah, I really do think they have that ability where they can be that team nobody wants to play.
Yeah, Chris mentioned the 2022 Lions. Look at that team. They started off something like 1-7 or 1-8 even, or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but they looked like an awful team if you looked at the record. But as you say, if you watched their games, and not that I watched them consistently, but they gave the Eagles a really tough time early in the
week
season.
1 that year.
Yeah, right. And
the Packers week 17.
Yeah, that's right. The Packers. Yeah. And so you could see that things were starting to happen. And then all of a sudden it was the game against the Giants at MetLife was their get right game, actually, and they kind of beat up the Giants in that game. They just like dominated their defensive line, which I didn't really think that much of. Their defensive line dominated the Giants' offensive line, and that was a game that the Giants not only lost but lost worse than I ever imagined them losing it, in terms of how they looked in that game. And the Lions just kind of took off at that point, and they haven't really looked back since.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you hope that it's not fool's gold if you see that at the end of the year as well, because we've seen that a couple times from the Giants where the second half looked a little bit better than the first half, but it didn't translate. But I think in the case of the Lions, like Chris said, I think that you can see when a team actually has something going. And oh, by the way, Chris, before we move on, I just want to say very, very seriously, in all seriousness, I object to the idea that podcasters or bloggers could ever say anything foolish.
Yes.
That never happens.
Never. Not once. Has never happened. I apologize. I retract the statement. I prostrate myself before the live stream.
Hey, speaking of the live stream and speaking of our commenters, we do have some action going on in the comments as I see, and just one of the early comments from Steven was that training camp and the preseason don't matter, and honestly, I have to disagree with that strongly, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you guys. But look. 2 years ago, the Giants were coming off a playoff season. And I think Brian Daboll made a massive mistake that spring and that summer because he treated the football team like it was an established football team. There were guys in red jerseys doing nothing all over the place all spring. There wasn't a whole lot there was almost no competitive drills during the spring. The summer was a summer where they seemed more concerned about getting guys to the starting line healthy than they did about getting ready for the season. And it took one drive to realize that they were going to get embarrassed. And last year was a little bit better in terms of training camp. There were more competitive periods. But again, for me, the Giants made the mistake of, the work that our starters get in these preseason, in these joint practices, that's enough. The preseason games don't matter. And it drives me crazy because I looked at this the other day. Do you realize if their starters play in week 2 and don't play again until the season opener, that's 22 days without competition, without them really doing anything in a practice that matters. And you can't tell me that's a good way to prepare for a season. So I think, preseason training camp, doing it right, driving these guys as hard as the rules allow you to drive them, playing them in the preseason games so that they're somewhat more ready to play. I think all of it's important.
Yeah. And this year, sorry, if I may, just real quick. And this year is, I would say, extra important because this is the first year in a very long time where there really is not a quarterback other than Tommy DeVito, who most of us don't believe will probably make the final roster, who has ever taken snaps with Brian Daboll before. So these snaps, these reps, everything is so valuable to progression and to comfortability and to developing a rapport for Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and our rookie, hopefully future quarterback, Jackson Dart.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I honestly do not envy the needle that Brian Daboll has to thread this year. Like he's got to get the starters ready. You've got to get the depth ready because who the hell knows what's going to happen. Like that's one thing I think every team understands is you never know when injury's going to hit. You never know if a whole position's going to get wiped out. Like we've seen that before. We've seen that plenty of times. But then also the season itself is a long haul. It is a grind. It is a war of attrition. And a lot of times the best teams are the ones that are healthiest at the end. So you don't want to grind guys to dust so that they're in late season form by October. That is not an easy needle to thread. And I might be alone in this, but I do think it was a mistake by the NFL to cut the 4th preseason game. I do think that going to 17 regular games and 3 preseason games, like that last preseason game was valuable for the back half of the roster guys. And then you have that 3rd preseason game as the dress rehearsal. This is something Ed talked about in his things I think is, maybe using that last preseason game as the dress rehearsal. But then you also do need to get the guys at the back end of the roster some play, some tape. And I do think that does kind of compress the preseason a little too much. And the Giants and probably the NFL as a whole are still probably looking for that balance. And I'm not sure there really is a really good balance to be struck in that. But yeah, the Giants have started way too slow the last couple years. They need to be more ready for the start. I'm hoping that, as much as we've talked about what a bear their schedule is this year, with the early Thursday night football and the late bye week, dividing the season into thirds might actually help them.
Tony, you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with all of what you said, but you could interpret Steven's comment about training camp and preseason in two different ways. And you answered it in regards to whether it's important, whether what happens in training camp and preseason is important to the team. And I agree with all of that. But I think what he was referring to is, and I could be wrong, is what the results that you see in training camp and preseason. You can't read too much into them. Okay. And so as he indicated, the Giants look pretty good against the Lions when they had them in and went to Detroit for scrimmages and things like that. Yet the Lions went one way during the season, and the Giants went a different way. When the Giants had joint practices with the Jets, they looked poor against the Jets, and the Jets with Aaron Rodgers looked pretty good against the Giants. And that was telling for the Giants, but it wasn't telling for the Jets, who went on to have their own awful season with what seemingly a good roster. And so I think it's true that you can't get too excited about anything that you see during camp and preseason, because you don't know how it's going to carry over into the regular season. And if the Giants go 3-0 in the preseason, well, that really does not mean anything, right? And if Russell Wilson looks good in the preseason, that doesn't mean he's going to look good in game one when he's facing Von Miller rushing him now that Von Miller is on Washington. So I think, there's the work that you do during camp and preseason is important. And I agree that the Giants did not approach that properly, especially in Daboll's second season. But I do think that any success or lack thereof that they have during the preseason, we shouldn't overinterpret that for what it means for the regular season.
Yeah, I like to say the preseason doesn't count, but it does matter. Yeah, I like to use the first game as a baseline and then see who improves how over the course of the season. It does the offensive line, the starting offensive line play, does that improve? Do the wide receivers look a little bit more comfortable with the quarterback? Which that's another thing I think can be interesting to follow, is just, how much does Russell Wilson play? I mean, you talk a couple years ago, the Jets with Aaron Rodgers, he basically didn't play in the preseason at all. And, obviously he tore his Achilles on the second play, but how much of a rapport would the receivers have had with him anyway? He might have gone on a darkness retreat way earlier than intended anyway. So, who knows there? But it's just, all of it does matter. It just doesn't count. And I think we will see quite a bit more competitive periods during training camp than we're used to. A lot more 7-on-7, a lot more 11-on-11, especially after the pads go on, because they do have some decisions to make along the trenches.
Yeah, and what you can interpret, I think, about the preseason is watching who's playing with the third team, who's playing with the second team, who's playing with the first team, and how that changes as camp goes on. And that, I think, is a useful indicator of who may be earning lots of playing time and who may be down on the depth chart once the season begins. And a lot of that could change, especially you have all these young guys and you're wondering how quickly. I mean, Abdul Carter, you expect him to get lots of snaps just on day one and every game. But let's say someone like Darius Alexander, for example, is he going to sit mostly early in the season, or is he going to become part of the rotation in the interior right away? And a lot of that you may be able to figure out by seeing who he's playing with as camp goes on.
Yes, Oh, go ahead, Ed.
No, go ahead, Chris. If you had a point to make, go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, just as far as like who plays with which team and like how sub packages work out, that's something I'm going to be very interested to see, because especially with like, Cordell Flott, and it seems like he might be pushing Deonte Banks. I am fascinated to see how Shane Bowen gets Dane Belton, Andrew Phillips on the field. How much dime are they going to play? But then you've got Mike McFadden coming off a breakout year. How do you take him off the field while also still trying to find snaps for Abdul Carter? Like, just finding that balance is going to be absolutely fascinating to me. Like, because Dane Belton, he is not a great cover safety. He's very good coming downhill. He's a good blitzer. And of the guys who were on the team last year, he's the one who has the nose for a football. So, they want to be Pirates. I want to see how they're going to get him on the field. But then
There's
Mike McFadden and Abdul Carter. The calculus there is going to be fascinating.
There's two players I don't want to hear preseason hype about. I'm sorry, I'm done. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear preseason hype about Dane Belton, because we know what Dane Belton is. He's a guy who finds his way to the football on occasion, but I see Nick shaking his head. But what I'm going to say is, if he was a good football player on a down-to-down basis, he's been through two offensive or defensive coordinators now. One of those guys would have found a reason to get him on the field full time. And the other one I don't want to hear any preseason hype about, and I'm sure I'll write about him a ton anyway, is Jalen Hyatt. Because there's not a darn thing that Jalen Hyatt did all spring or does all training camp that matters until we get to week 1 and somebody actually tries to knock him off a route when he tries to get off the line of scrimmage.
I'll say this about Dane Belton, and I think everything you said is spot on, Ed, but right now Dane Belton is in a situation that I think the infrastructure around him will maximize his potential as a player. Because you're right, he is not a down-to-down excellent safety who's going to fit the run with physicality and be reliable in that manner, but he's more of somebody who is cerebrally advanced, who can use his vision and his ability to anticipate route concepts. And if you put him out there in those sub packages, his effectiveness is going to be maximized because you have Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, Chauncey Gould's, and all these dudes rushing. And if the Giants can be in these big nickel, big dime packages more, that's going to allow Dane Belton to get on the field to possibly come away with these turnovers. So that's my one thing on Dane Belton. I think he is somewhat of a niche player, but I think that niche is very valuable if the Giants can find themselves in these sub packages that we hope to see them in. That means they have leads and they're able to hopefully come away with more than 5 or 6 interceptions in a season.
So who has faith in Shane Bowen to figure it out with all the pieces that he has, and who doesn't?
So I wouldn't say, if I may, I wouldn't say I have faith in Shane Bowen too. I think it's more of just, hey, it's your time to shine, buddy. You have all of these assets at your disposal. Now I need to see you be the coach that Brian Dable and Joe Shane thought you were when Hard Knocks came out and they were ushering praise towards you, because it's great that he has all of these assets, but he might mismanage it. He might mismanage it, right? And then at that point, it's just like, all right, well, someone else come in here. So I can't sit here and say I have faith, but I'm not. There's not a lack of faith either. It's just proven at this point. That's where I'm at.
That's where I'm at too. I would say if there is like a kernel of faith for me, it is how he adjusted after Dexter Lawrence went down.
It's a very good point.
When he had to try out basically a no-name defense, and the DVOA, the EPA didn't necessarily improve, but they didn't fall off a cliff either. They played hard, and he definitely did adjust to the personnel. They played a lot more cover 3 and cover 1. They played a lot more single high, middle field closed, and they played a lot more aggressively downhill. And even when he was forced to try out Jordan Riley, Elijah Chapman, and Elijah Garcia as his defensive line, and you had guys going in and out. Adoree Jackson was your, cornerback one. Drew Phillips, Tyler Newman, those guys were kind of in and out in the lineup. The defense still at least showed up. And, over the last 7 games, only 2 guys had more than 100 yards rushing. They kept Derrick Henry to less than 70 yards rushing. That to me is at least, that's at least a little bit of a handhold that, given what could be more horses than anyone else in the NFL has to work with. Like, even the Eagles, they lost some guys. They lost some potentially very good guys on that defense. Like, it's possible from a pure talent point of view, the Giants could be a top 3 defense in this league. If Shane Bowen can get them all running in the same direction, that's at least what he did in the second half is at least a kernel. Because I remember we talked about it. Like, the Giants are going to get run off the field. They're going to give up 50 every game as soon as Dexter Lawrence went down. Like, hope went out the window completely. And they didn't. They played hard. He made adjustments. My concern is that he doesn't avoid a Perry Fuel. Because I remember Perry Fuel, that 2011, when he adjusted, he started playing aggressive ass defense. He started calling defense like Spags. And then 2012 came along and he went right back to the Tampa 2. Off and soft. And my fear is that Shane Bowen will not avoid that. But my hope is that he learns from last year.
And the thing to say is that, right, 2 of their first 3 draft picks are right in line with what supposedly Shane Bowen wants to do, right? I mean,
Yes.
what he did at Tennessee, right? He wanted those 4 guys on the line rushing the passer, and he may not have been as innovative as Wink Martindale was in the schemes that he used and things like that. But he wants to get after the passer, and,
Yes.
and Joe Shane gave him 2 more guys to get after the passer, in addition to the 3 guys that were already there, and then throw in Chauncey Golston to boot. So, you can say that they're setting him up to be able to run the defense the way he'd like to run it.
Yeah, and it's I was just going to say, it's also interesting because if you look at the advanced numbers, Bowen did blitz more last year than he ever had as defensive coordinator at Tennessee. The Giants were in the top quarter to top third in the league in terms of how much man-to-man defense they played. He just didn't do those things as often as Wink Martindale had done them. He did them more often than he had done them in the past. So I do think there's some willingness on Bowen's part to bend his scheme to look more, at the personnel that he's got. I think that process needs to continue.
Yes. And the thing one of the things I'm very curious about is, did the Giants tip their hand a little bit with Paulson Adebo? Adebo? I don't know. I've heard it both ways. And this is the thing we've talked about, is Deonte Banks is a press man cover corner. Like, he's big, he's physical, he is insanely athletic. He likes to get in guys' faces, disrupt them with the jam, get in their hip pocket, and go. Adebo has always kind of been more of a man cover corner as well. Does this signal maybe a change in philosophy that, they're going to go with a more aggressive coverage scheme, at least on the outside? Maybe run more quarters with, pattern matching rules, more meg coverage on the outside, and maybe make it a little bit more difficult for offenses to predict and find easy answers, and also make it tougher for quarterbacks to get that ball out of their hands early. Let those pass rushers get the 2.5 seconds to work. Go ahead, Nick. I know you got something.
Oh no, I was waiting to possibly change to the next subject at this point. I think we've talked a lot about this specific one, but I am right there with you. I don't want to beat a dead horse at this moment. I would say that last year was out of necessity that Shane Bowen really altered his defense, because if he didn't, the Giants were going to surrender like 300 yards on the ground. So they had to play a much more aggressive approach once they played the Saints, and then they played the Ravens. Like, they were playing some teams that were going to run the football down their throat. So I admire that he was able to do that, but he's a professional coach. He should be able to do that. That's what coaching is you tailor your game plan based on your personnel and your situation. So now this is a much different situation. Let's see if he can get the most out of the players that he has.
Yeah, let's move to a different topic, Nick. Let's actually talk about let's go to the other side of the ball. Let's talk about the offensive line, and let's talk about, I think Chris mentioned it earlier, and I'm going to say this. I disagree that there are a lot of question marks and a lot to figure out on the offensive line. There's really one thing to figure out on the offensive line, and that's whether or not Evan Neal can take a starting job away from Greg Van Roten.
Yes.
That's it. And, we can figure out, are they going to keep 9 offensive linemen? Are they going to keep 10? And is it really, it's not really that big of a question if the last offensive lineman is going to be Aaron Stinney or Austin Schlottman, but the other big question is the health of Andrew Thomas. And look, everything that I've been told this offseason is that we shouldn't be worried about the fact that he never practiced in the spring, that the Giants were just strength conditioning and strength training and making sure that his foot was, was 100%. But it's hard not to be concerned, because I was at a lot of those practices in mini camp and the OTA practices that we're allowed to be at. And we never saw Andrew Thomas outside. Okay, we never saw him come outside. So I think you have to be concerned until you see it. But Andrew Thomas makes so much difference, because everybody complains about the Giants' offensive line. But in my view, with the players that they have, you put Andrew Thomas out there healthy, playing the way Andrew Thomas can play, and you absolutely have a competent offensive line that you should be able to move the football with.
I agree.
First ball at Yankee Stadium about 10 days ago.
He did.
Yeah.
Was he limping?
He did.
Did he reach home plate?
Look at his foot. No.
He threw a strike. He threw a strike. I'm pretty sure he threw a strike.
I'll say this just on the offensive line, and I gotta bounce after this, guys. With Andrew Thomas and Jermaine Illuminor, if they're fully healthy, I would contend that that's a top 10 tackle duo in the entire National Football League.
That's fair.
And I think that's a completely fair. I don't even think that's a stretch at that point, because Andrew Thomas is one of the better, and Jermaine Illuminor is a respectable, I would say above average starting offensive lineman in the league. My I don't want to say issue, but what gives me some reservation is the interior offensive line. Like, John Michael Schmitz has not played up to his second round pedigree. John Runyon, I don't want to say he's a disappointment, but I don't necessarily think he's a difference maker. I think he's like an average player. And then Greg Van Roten, I think, was respectable last year, given the fact that he joined camp at like the end of July and just stepped in and I would say filled a valuable role. But if I had my druthers, and I'm sure if the Giants did as well, Evan Neal would take that spot, and Greg Van Roten would be the swing interior offensive lineman, maybe along with Aaron Stinney. But with all this, with everything I said, I think it's fair to say right now, and I'm not sold that this offensive line is going to be a difference-making unit, and I'm not even suggesting that, but this is the deepest offensive line the Giants have had in a while. I haven't even mentioned Marcus Bowe. And then guys like James Hudson III and Stone Forsythe, look, I don't want any of them to see the football field, but they're more competent than other offensive linemen, in my opinion, based on the film studies that I've seen of them. They're more competent with a little bit higher upside, specifically with James Hudson III, than some of the offensive linemen we've seen in recent years. So I just think there's at least a level of depth here. And then you got guys like Jake Kubis, who reportedly the Giants like inside the building. There's a level of depth here that is more respectable than in years past. I'm still just not sure, like, what's the complete upside to this offensive line with their current interior unit being what it is.
Yeah.
But I got to step off, guys.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Be well.
All right. Be
Talk
good,
later,
Nick.
Nick.
Thanks for hopping on.
Of course. Peace.
And just to come back to the Evan Neal thing, Evan Neal showed last year, finally in the NFL for the first time, that he can be a good run blocker, and that was his rep at Alabama.
Yeah.
The things that he has problems with in pass blocking, scouts saw that at Alabama as well. So those weren't new. I think the surprise with Evan Neal is that these problems that he had in pass blocking in college, which people knew were there, people assumed he'd get those cleaned up when he got to the NFL, and it turned out he just couldn't get them cleaned up. But the run blocking, which actually also wasn't good his first 2 years, was very good last year. And the Giants were not a great run blocking team the last couple of years. And if they actually have a stud on the inside blocking for the run, now with Tracy and Scatterboo, you have some interesting possibilities. I mean, as great as Saquon Barkley was last season for Philadelphia, you have to attribute some of that. And if you watch the games, I think it's pretty easy to attribute some of that to the fact that offensive line, even on the inside, opened up these gaping holes for him to run through. So he wasn't getting first contact 1 yard behind the line of scrimmage anymore. He was already yards downfield before anyone laid a hand on him. And so, not that the Giants have Saquon Barkley now, but Tracy is an elusive back. Scatterboo, in his own way, I think elusive's not the right word, but
he is the opposite of that,
right? Except that he's not just a ground and pound guy either. He's not elusive. Instead, he's a bounce off you type of.
And he's also a pass catcher.
Yeah, and a pass catcher, right? But he's kind of a billiard ball as a running back, right? And so if they have somebody on the inside who can start to effectively open up holes, as Evan Neal may be able to do, then that could make their running game even more dangerous than it seemed. And I thought Tracy, when he wasn't fumbling, was doing a really nice job for them last season. And I'm interested to see what Scatterboo can add to that.
Yeah, I do think they offer a really interesting counterbalance to each other. Scatterboo he loves contact, and he has very good vision and great contact balance. Tracy is incredibly elusive. Like, he gets skinny like a guy who is 220-ish, 215. Like, he gets skinny like someone that size shouldn't. He reminds me of Derek Ward back in the day. If Scatterboo can be, and this is a bit of a deep cut, Andre Brown. Post-injury, Brown before he tore his ACL was fast as well as elusive, and great contact balance, all of that. But if Scatterboo can have that same vision, contact balance, grind out the tough yards and pound defenses, and then Tracy can just kind of flow through them, that's a tough dichotomy for defenses to adjust to. But again, the difference will be on the offensive line. And I think any way it works out, the Giants' offensive line should at least be competent as long as Andrew Thomas is healthy. He talked about Evan Neal's run blocking, and I think we did finally see it. Fans, writers, all of us were frustrated with how long it took him to get onto the field. We were wondering, screaming, why he was on the bench and they were trotting out Joshua Zudu to play left tackle. But then once he finally got on the field at right tackle, he wasn't terrible. Like, there were a couple games he was honestly almost good out there at right tackle. And I did see traits that could or should translate to guard, whether it's left guard, right guard, that'll work itself out in the wash. My concern is his height. And I think, to what you said, Tony, about how scouts saw the issues that Evan Neal has shown on tape at Alabama. Honestly, I think a lot of that was forgiven because of his positive traits. For a guy his size, he actually does have pretty quick feet. He is pretty athletic for a guy his size. But I honestly really do think if he is if he is just too big, too tall, its center of gravity is too high, and amazing athletes can be amazing, but they can't fight physics. Like if his center of gravity is too high, there's the ability to redirect, work back inside or work outside, or change direction, that sort of thing, to win leverage battles. That is always going to be difficult for you. And when it comes to scouting, I've personally have started 6'6" is kind of my cutoff for an offensive tackle anymore. I start to mark guys down if they're over that, because if you're going against a 6'3" defender, you have to drop your hips 4 inches just to match them. And then when they're getting low, just everybody, you don't have to get up and try it yourself, but just think about playing with your butt down a whole foot for 3 hours, basically. That's not easy. So that is really my big concern for Evan Neal, because he's got length, he has strength out the wazoo. Like, that is a powerful man. And I do, looking at him, because when I did my deep dive on him, I went back and looked at him in 2019, last time he played guard. He has completely transformed his body. Like, he looks like an athlete now. He didn't when he was a 19, 20-year-old freshman. So yeah, to me, that really is just what it comes down to, is can he win the leverage battles inside?
And I will say this, in reference to Evan Neal, I think that the Giants will give him every chance to win a starting job. Look, the Giants will be in a better place with a 25-year-old Evan Neal who's a powerful run blocker than they would be with a 35-year-old Greg Van Roten, who is an adequate player, who's a guy that, you bring in a Greg Van Roten as a fill-in, as a guy to get you to the next guy. All right. If you've got a 25-year-old Evan Neal, if he can be what Mekhi Becton was for the Eagles a year ago, that's a guy you can re-sign and make an anchor to the interior of your line. And so that puts the Giants in a better place. Any other thing? I think James O'Keefe in the comments mentioned, I hope they decide on the starting 5 linemen quickly. And to me, that goes back to the whole training camp preseason and how it matters discussion. The Giants made a mistake 2 years ago when they were rotating players position to position, every snap, every 2 snaps, and they didn't really decide what their offensive line was going to be until they started practicing for the Cowboys, before week 1 of the regular season. And that was a devastating mistake, because you didn't have guys playing together, playing where they were going to play. And so my hope is, the other thing I hope, to be honest with you, we can argue about whether Evan Neal's a better left tackle or left guard or right guard or whatever. I don't want to see the Giants do to John Runyon what they did in the middle of training camp last year. After telling him when they signed him he was the right guard, halfway through training camp they told him he was the left guard. Entering training camp, they're telling him he's the left guard. And yes, he can play the right side. But do you want to move him again with 3 weeks, with 3 weeks before the season starts? Do you want to do that to him again? So I think the biggest question is really, can Evan Neal take a job from Greg Van Roten, and the Giants will be better off if he can.
I agree completely. I think, going back a few years, back to 2022, I was really hoping they would have a quarterback competition and, basically make Daniel Jones earn that starting quarterback job. Because if he couldn't beat out Tyrod Taylor, then you knew, like, straight up, you knew what your answer was as to whether or not he was the guy. And I think for Evan Neal, Greg Van Roten, that's the same. That's the exact same situation. If Evan Neal cannot beat out Greg Van Roten, then You know he is not a guy you can re-sign. You know, Greg Van Roten is then your starting guard. You know, barring something surprising, you know, Joshua Zudu storming up the depth chart, Mark Zimbo surprising, you know, not being a swing tackle, whatever, being a guard. I think that's where he ultimately winds up, whatever. But I think they do need to get that settled as quickly as possible, so John Michael Schmitz can get comfortable as quickly as possible. And I think that's another argument for keeping John Runyon at left guard, because they've got reps there together. They know how the other responds. You know, as few moving parts as they can get away with, the better. And getting John Michael Schmitz to make that next step, that's something they also need to happen. Yeah. If they have to replace Evan Neal next offseason, so be it. It sucks, but so be it. Especially since, you know, Jermaine Illuminor is not getting any younger either. If they have to ultimately start looking for a new center and a new guard / tackle, we're right back on that offensive line hamster wheel. And I don't want to scout any more offensive linemen than I have to. Please.
Oh, let's not. Come on, Chris. We can't be making it all about you now, can we?
Yes, we can.
Hey guys, let's talk about something that's been a subject of debate, you know, since before last season even ended, and that's the future of Brian Daboll. And I think we could talk about Joe Schoen too, but I actually think Joe Schoen is on firmer ground than Brian Daboll. You guys can disagree with me if you want to, but bringing back Daboll and Schoen, you know, and particularly, you know, Daboll and the situation that they were in, you know, John Merrick gave conflicting signals. He said, on one hand, you know, I need to be happier with the product on the field, but our biggest priority's got to be getting a quarterback of the future. Those two things don't necessarily go together. And everybody says, oh, Daboll's on the hot seat. I'm not 100% sure that his seat is as hot as everybody wants to make it. I think that, if they go 3-14, they're not going to have a choice. All right. But I believe that the drafting of Jackson Dart and Daboll's reputation, the fact that this is the guy that he banged the table for, that's pretty clear. I mean, Joe Schoen can say this was an organizational decision, but the video that we saw of Schoen saying, you know, this is your guy, this is the one you want, you believe in this guy, so let's go get him, pretty much tells you that this is Daboll's guy. The Giants know what they did to Daniel Jones with, you know, 3 head coaches and 2 GMs and a half a dozen offensive coordinators and all of that. I believe that the Giants are going to be looking for reasons to keep Brian Daboll, not reasons to fire him. So I guess the question for each of you is, do you agree with that? And how hot do you think the man's seat is entering the season?
I agree with that personally. I think that barring kind of, you know, an embarrassment, right? And the 2021 season, as it spun out of control after Jones got hurt, and there's more and more pressure on Joe Judge, and then he finally started acting crazy at press conferences.
Joe didn't react well to that. No,
he didn't.
The last 2 games, he wasn't even trying to pass the ball and get first downs and so on and so forth. Right?
I take some blame for that too. Tony, I'm just going to interrupt you quickly, because there were two questions at press conferences. One where he gave us a 6 to 7 minute answer, where that sort of told you right then and there that he was losing it. And that was a question that I had asked him, you know, and then a couple of weeks later, there was an 11-minute answer to a question. And then I was like, you know, he's done. He's done. He's completely over the, he's down the river somewhere. But anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you. So Tony,
Well, I was just
go
going to say,
ahead.
you better not advertise that. They may take away your press credentials. So anyway, so I think right. And I've never met John Mara, but my impression is that he doesn't want to fire people, and he wants to stick with people and teams and give them a chance to succeed. But he feels his hand is forced sometimes by situations in which things become a circus, like the end of the 2021 season did. And so I think the 2022 season was one of those embarrassments that I think made it possible that Dable, the end of the 2023 season was one of those embarrassments that maybe made him start thinking about things like that. And when you hear about more and more unrest in the locker room and things like that, and the whole Wink Martindale fiasco during the season, after the season, and so on and so, those are the types of things I think would lead him to fire Brian Dable. The flip side of the coin is that there still seems to be a lot of sentiment around the league that Brian Dable is a good coach, despite the fact that he hasn't gotten the results outside of the 2022 season. People, I think, feel that he knows what he's doing on offense, but that he has not been given the personnel to do it with, and especially he hasn't been given the quarterback to do with it. I think that as a general rule, I gather, again, I'm not in the locker room, but I gather that many of the players like him. And so I think if the team this year looks respectable, they can still have a losing record. They could even go, let's say, 6-11 or 5-12. But if they're losing games close to good teams because they just don't quite have enough, and it looks like the team is making progress. If Jackson Dart gets into the lineup and he's starting to develop as a quarterback and things like that, I think that they'll come back with Brian Dable for another season. I think Brian Dable's mistakes have been maybe the mistakes of a rookie head coach, and the only way you can cure being a rookie head coach is to get experience. And so I didn't think he did a bad job overall last season. There were individual things that I disagreed with that he's done over times, mainly how he's handled his quarterback. So not letting Tyrod Taylor come back and be the starter after he was recovered from his injury in 2023 and sticking with DeVito. I think that was something that he didn't understand what the negative ramifications of that would be off the field. And that type of thing is what I think he has to avoid. He has to do things that will make sense to the team, that the players themselves won't be scratching their heads and talking amongst themselves about it when he's not there. If he can avoid that, I think he comes back for another year, because as you say, you don't let the guy draft his quarterback and then not give him a reasonable chance to make him into a good quarterback, especially when your head coach is someone who has a reputation as a quarterback developer.
Yeah, I agree. I think John Mara wants to give Brian Daboll 2026 to, really see how Jackson Dart develops this year, get him on the field next year. I think the realistic hope is that the Giants are in a position where Dart can play against the Raiders at the end of the year, maybe the Cowboys too. Who knows? See how that goes. I think the real hope is that he can push Russell Wilson off the field. That, if Russ is playing well and Dart is just undeniable, that would be fantastic. That's the dream. But I think realistically, they'd like to get him on the field in the second half, maybe even sometime in the last couple of games. Yeah, I'm not sure if they want his first game to be, week 18 with Micah Parsons, possibly with the playoff coming up, the playoffs on the line, and Osa Odigizua coming up the middle and all that. But yeah, I think to a certain extent, the Giants, John Mara in particular, would like to separate the team's performance from the team's record, because I think, or at least I should hope, that he isn't under a whole lot of illusions as to where this team is in its development. This is still a very young team. They were one of the youngest teams in the NFL last year. They'll probably wind up being one of the youngest teams in the NFL this year. And that's even with Graham Gano breaking the bell curve for them. And Russell Wilson breaking the bell curve for them. This is a very young team. They're relying on a lot of first, second, third year players at important positions. And their schedule, at least as things stand now, looks like it could be an absolute beast. It's possible they could be vastly improved over last year and still wind up with a 6-win season. But if they're putting a better product on the field, that's something John Mara should feel good about. That's something we should feel good about. And that I don't think a losing season in and of itself should be reason to fire Brian Daboll. Yeah, I think, like Tony said, as long as he doesn't lose the locker room, as long as the team doesn't embarrass itself, I don't think Daboll's seat should be more than lukewarm. Like, he should be feeling pressure. There are very few coaches who shouldn't be feeling pressure to win, to produce, to field a competitive team. I mean, every coach should be under pressure to field a competitive team. I mean, everything Andy Reid has done, if the Chiefs are all of a sudden uncompetitive, he might be persuaded to retire. Maybe not this year, but then next year. For Brian Daboll, for the Giants, I think it is kind of a 2-year window for them to put it together, to put up or shut up. It might be in John Mara's mind, because I don't know the dynamics behind the scenes after 2022, after they made the playoffs, if John was the one who pushed Joe Shane to kind of try to short circuit the process and shorten the curve, who it was who pushed to trade for Darren Waller and, do all of those moves, a very Gettleman-esque offseason that was. But it could be with drafting Jackson Dart, him being the guy, and this year being the bridge. They've kind of reset the clock to where it should have been if they hadn't won all of those one score, how in the hell did they do that games in 2022?
Did you have something to add to that, Tony?
Yeah, just one little thing to add to that. And and you can see by the way that they built the team, as Chris was saying, they're one of the youngest teams, in the league. And there's a reason why Washington is the team that signed Von Miller to a 1-year deal, and not the Giants. In addition to the fact that the Giants don't look like they need another pass rusher right now, but Washington is playing like a team that says, we're in our window now. Let's go for it. The way you go for it is by taking a 36 or something like that year-old Von Miller and adding him to the team, because he's still playing well, right? The Giants aren't doing it. The Giants are signing free agents as younger players to multi-year contracts, all right, and they're taking their shot at their rookie quarterback now too. So everything that they're doing is to me the sign of a team that's trying to build, not a team that thinks they have any chance to go for it. And so I think you have to, under most circumstances, give the guy that you handed these assets to the chance to do something with them, recognizing that they're a young team.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you wind up in a situation where you've wasted that pick on the quarterback, because 2 years from now, or whenever, a year from now, you bring in a regime that didn't draft that quarterback and probably wants to go in a different direction and get its own guy. So you spin your wheels again. And something that I wrote today was also, you get into that situation. Dexter Lawrence probably says, I want out of here. Malik Neighbors probably says, I want out of here. And then you're back to square one. But what I wanted to finish on is this. In the column that I wrote Sunday, I did sort of best case, worst case scenarios for the upcoming season. And one of the things that I've spent a lot of time thinking about is this whole idea that 2025 will be a redshirt season for Jackson Dart. And I think that's a bunch of nonsense. I think there's going to come a point in time when Jackson Dart is starting football games. So, and I don't know if that's week 5 or week 14 or week 13 or week 10 or whenever it is. But I wanted to throw a scenario at you guys that I wrote about today and see how you feel it should be handled. I looked at it and I looked back at the 2004 season when Tom Coughlin made the decision to bench Kurt Warner for Eli Manning with 7 games remaining in the season. At that point in time, the Giants were 5-4. They were in position with a veteran quarterback to maybe sneak into the playoffs, maybe make a run to the wild card. And what I want to know is, what does Brian Daboll do if he's in that same situation? You get 10, 12 games into the season, you can maybe sneak in as a wild card. Is it more important that you go all in and make that push to be a wild card team that probably doesn't win a game in the playoffs? But, you never know. But is it more important to make that push, or is it more important to make sure one way or another that you get 4 or 5 games out of Jackson Dart at some point so that he can hit the ground running as your QB1 in 2026? Anybody?
Yeah, I'll field it. I think that is a thorny decision because the Giants as a team are in a different place than they were in 2004 because they have so many other young players. Yeah. Jackson Dart is the future of the franchise, for better or worse. But you do have to worry about, or not worry, think about Theo Johnson, about Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scatterbu. You do have to think about, well, maybe not so much Wan'Dale Robinson. I know you didn't want to hear anything about Jalen Hyatt, but you do have to think about him at least a little bit because you do hope he can be a piece for you going forward. You do have to think about the defensive side of the ball. And I go back to what I said at the start about the quarterback being your foundation. And the coaches do also have to develop those other guys. And I think if Russell Wilson is your best chance to both win, but also your most consistent player, I think at that point, it's Russ's job to keep Jackson Dart on the bench, to play well enough that you almost can't justify taking him off because it would hurt the other guys. And then at that point, it's also Jackson Dart's job to knock Russ off the field. Like, again, if he can get to the point where he is undeniable, where he is taking in information, he is showing a sufficient mastery of the offense in practice and in the meeting rooms and all of that, that it's not going to disrupt the rest of the team, where the defense is still getting the opportunity to rush the passer. Offenses can't just sit back and run the ball 500 times, like they did last year. And the ball is going to be where it's supposed to be for the receivers when it's supposed to be there, then I would go ahead and make that change, because as much respect as I have for Russell Wilson, he's not the future. Yeah. Jackson Dart is the future. But I also, you don't have a Michael Strahan. You don't have, Plaxico Burress, or you don't have established guys there who can more or less weather the storm and be okay. They do have a lot of young guys who, they'll have to grow with Jackson Dart, but you also have to ensure they have a good environment in which to grow. It's kind of a big, it depends. And I do want to see Dart get at least one start this year. Again, the dream is that he forces his way onto the field and they cannot keep him off. But I still kind of think the Pat Mahomes plan, where the Giants are either in position to, they either have a playoff berth secured or are in a position where they can play spoiler, and then you just give Dart the start and then say, screw up the Cowboys season. That'd be great.
Yeah. So I agree with all that. I think Dart is definitely going to start sometime this season. I would say the difference with 2004 is that Kurt Warner was not playing especially well for the Giants. He kind of got off to a good start, and the Giants got off to a good start. But then I think in midseason, I think they lost maybe 3 out of 4 games or something like that. And what looked like it might be a promising season, that Giants team was kind of used to making the playoffs. The 2000 team made it to the Super Bowl. The 2002 team made it to the playoffs and then blew the playoff game. But then in 2003, they had a bad season. But I think they still thought of themselves as a playoff team at that time. And early in 2004, with Kurt Warner at the helm, I think they were thinking of themselves as a team that was going to get back to the playoffs that year, and that there was no rush to get Eli onto the field. But then once Warner started having a few bad games in a row, I would guess that caused them to reevaluate that. And maybe they saw an opportunity there. Maybe they said, well, realistically, looking at this team, we're not ready yet. And so we should get Eli onto the field sooner rather than later and let him take his lumps. So, how good will Russell Wilson be the first 5 games of the season, the first half of the season, whatever? If he, if he's cooking, then I don't see how you take him off the field. If he's cooked, then and that's not my line. Was that your line, Ed? I don't know.
It might be. Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah. If he looks like he's done, then obviously it depends on what Dart looks like in practice, which we won't get to see mostly, right? And so you can imagine there's a point where Daboll is saying, I think I've ridden with Russ as long as I can, and Dart's looking good enough to me. Let's get him out there now and start giving him some real game experience, because whatever your other misgivings are about doing it, there's nothing like actually getting players into a real game, right? And so he certainly wants to play him sometime this season so that he gets his feet wet, okay? And for Daboll in 2018, Nathan Peterman, who was the starting quarterback, he got all of one game in which they got blown out before Josh Allen came in to clean up, and then Josh Allen, I think, was starting the next week. And so, I think you look at these things and you say, okay, now you just have this gut feeling. Now's the right time. I bet they don't have a coherent plan for exactly when they want to put Dart into the lineup. I think they're going to let the season speak to them and the practices speak to them and say, I think this is the time to do it. But surely before the end of the season, I think he's going to get a few games. I think he's going to get more than the one game that Patrick Mahomes got the last week of the season, because the Kansas City was in the process of clinching a playoff berth, so they couldn't fool around, right? So they could wait until they clinched it and then give Mahomes one game. I doubt the Giants will be in that situation this season, so I'd expect that we would see Dart sooner. But how soon?
Right. Yeah, the last thing I'll say about that is the idea that Dart will start week 1 is nonsense. I know that Russell Wilson did that in Seattle back in 2012, but Jackson Dart's not competing with Matt Flynn, and also Russell Wilson is not Nathan Peterman. So with that said, guys, we've gone on for close to an hour and 20 minutes here. I think that's probably a good place for us to call it a day. Thank you to both of you guys for spending the time, and for Nick Falato for dropping in. Chris, just make a better dinner plan next time.
Yes, I'll break more laws next time. I promise.
All right. Giants fans, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. And as always, remember to please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.